Hello, and welcome to another podcast episode of the Science of Psychotherapy Conversations. I'm Richard Hill, and today we're going to meet a really fascinating woman, Jessica Dibb. Now, Jessica Dibb is an expert in the area of breathwork, and she has been doing this work for many years and has a wonderful organization, the Inspiration Consciousness School, and we'll have website connections for her so you can see that. But she's written a fabulous book for Norton, Breathwork and Psychotherapy, the clinical applications for healing and transformation. But I've read it, and it's really a book for everybody. There's something that can be seen everywhere. So let's go see and talk to Jessica, who works with breathwork. She works with, she's been a ballet dancer. She's done all kinds of extraordinary things in her life, and she's now bringing to us this wonderful work. So let's go over to the US of A. And welcome, Jessica Dibb, to the Conversations, the Science of Psychotherapy podcast. And I'm so pleased you could join because there's so many interesting things. Now, I initially sort of found you because of this wonderful book coming out with from Norton's, Breathwork and Psychotherapy. Then I looked you up. You have this incredible Inspiration and Consciousness School. You do wonderful work with this breathwork with Enneagrams. My gosh, there's so many interesting things. But not to load you with all that. Maybe just start off a little bit with an awareness of yourself to give the audience listening a sense of who you are and how you've arrived at this point of writing a book for Norton.
Well, thank you so much, Richard, and it's an honor to be with you. I really think that your podcast is quite a contribution to the world and the field of psychotherapy, but really just to people in general that are interested in healing and personal growth. So I'm delighted that you invited me to be here. You know, Richard, like you, I can tell from our conversation before this podcast that you really want to make a contribution. You want the world, people to be healthier and happier, and to know how they can flower themselves might be a way that I would say it, how they can express their potential in the world. And I think that's how I came to all of this and to be writing this book for Norton, that from the time I was a little girl, I could feel that every person really was born with an innate desire to love, to be loved, but really to be love itself and to express that love in some form. And, you know, whether it was through plumbing or taking care of animals or teaching children or baking or whatever it was, I could see in my parents, for instance, the desire to really be love. And yet I could see fear. I could see the constrictions. I could see the habits and the conditions that had led people to be afraid to be their most authentic self and to allow this love to flow into the world. And so it may sound sort of magical, but it's really true that even from a young age, I was sort of looking for a magical key that would unlock this sphere and allow this potential to go into the world. And my journey took me in different places. Initially, I, at a very young age, was inspired by ballet, watching the Royal Danish Ballet at night in New Hampshire. One night, my mother brought me at the age of 5, and I thought it was so beautiful. I just thought, well, if everybody could be exposed to this beauty, they wouldn't be afraid anymore, and they'd let this love flow into the world. So I was very dedicated to being a ballet dancer, and I moved to New York at a young age and danced at Lincoln Center. And, you know, it was a magical ride, just amazing. And yet I became aware that it would not be a universal medicine. And I think that's when I started to get the notion by the age of about 13 or 14 of what would be a unifying and universal medicine that could unlock people's fear and allow them to contact their potential, be their most authentic self, and let this love flow into the world in different creative ways. And so I got into yoga, and I was practicing very diligently, many, many hours a day, particularly pranayama, which is the science of breathing. And I was becoming aware that I could energize myself with the breathing. I could heat my body up. I could lower my body temperature. I could rest and put myself to sleep. I could learn to focus with different kinds of techniques. I even knew that there were techniques that would address respiratory challenges such as asthma or COPD or emphysema and blood pressure and things like that. So I was very excited about that. I did see eventually that even yoga wouldn't be a universal medicine because it has a certain culture. Some people aren't going to want to move their bodies that way. And so I thought, well, I'll go to medical school and I'll get a degree. I loved medicine anyway. And I will then have the credentials, to teach people about the power of their own body, what they can do introspectively for health and well-being and wholeness at a psychological level as well as a physical level. And I was right on the verge of going to medical school, but really torn about it because I now had a beautiful 2-year-old son and I knew this was like a precious time. I couldn't imagine the hours of medical school. And I had been going to a holistic healing clinic for a while, and the person who was the head of it was a psychologist who also knew about breath work. And he just looked at me one day and said, I've just been looking for somebody to train for like 2 years, and I think you're the person. And I just felt something rise up in me. And the first time that I did a breathwork session, which we can talk about that, these are the deeper kinds of breath work that I think taps into human potential, taps into flow states, taps into the unconscious, brings conscious awareness to that which we've not been able to access before. And the first time I ever came out of a session like that, working with him, I just thought, this is it. Why isn't the whole world doing this? Because breathing is the universal medicine. Everybody can breathe. Everybody breathes, even somebody on a respirator, even somebody who's paralyzed. Breathing transcends language, size, religion, race, gender, anything that you could come up with. And so I became very excited about that. And I started to connect our capacity to breathe well and to bring ourselves into a state of presence somatically, emotionally, and cognitively, which then also means that you're going to feel spiritually present. I started to connect that with really awakened states of consciousness or expanded states of consciousness, as well as psychological wholeness. And it just felt like everything I'd been looking for my whole life for myself and my parents and everybody that in the world really came together in that idea of breathing. And I became very dedicated to helping to cultivate an understanding about conscious breathing, about breath work, the science, the philosophy, the poetry of it, the skills and the techniques of it, just about every aspect of it, the unifying nature of it, how I could do that and also raise training standards for breath workers and ethical standards. And so I had this, this consciousness school just kind of rose up. A bunch of people here in Maryland, the USA, started asking me a lot of questions and they wanted to learn more and more. And before I knew it, there were 100 people that were coming and classes were starting up. And our classes are very eclectic. They certainly have many time-honored practices from many different lineages, but they're also very emergent. They're very somatic, psycho-spiritual, and social as well. And in all of them, we do meditation and movement and all of these different inner inquiry and psychological development. And always breathing is centered because we know that breathing is the fastest way that two things can happen. One is that we can get present so that we're not dissociative anymore. And the second is that we can move underneath our conditioned way of looking at ourselves and others, and we can access what Dr. Dan Siegel would call the plane of possibility.
Well, you'll love to know that I just did a workshop where I sort of capitalized my stuff on possibility, and so Dan and I we talked about the same sorts of frameworks coming from mathematics and this plane of possibility, which is the place where all things have the potential to arise from, as different
Yes.
from our plane of probability, which is our, nice go-to experiential memories and knowledge, but it only
Mhm.
contains what we've done. It never
Right.
contains what we haven't done yet. Uh, but the other thought too there with this work that's necessary in breathing, absolutely. I mean, I'm so behind the all those wonderful things you're saying there, but it also means that we've lost ways of breathing
Yes.
because of the way we are. I'm a great believer that everything that's good for us, we've been doing for thousands and thousands of years.
Yeah.
And why have we stopped now? And breathing is absolutely one of them. I mean, I can just think of increased sitting down, so could pressure on the stuff.
Mhm.
And just one more comment. I don't want to chat too much. It's you. I want to hear more from you. But I started breath work when I started to learn singing, which was I was about 14,
Mhm.
quite young to start. But and I had a lovely career as a singer and an actor and did wonderful things uh, of bringing truth, of supporting truth, which was the character
Mhm.
I was presenting, with
Mhm.
breath.
Yes.
And I used to have a lovely party trick. And I didn't know it was a wise, clever, fabulous thing. But I could breathe in quite deeply, move my diaphragm and each rib side of the ribs separately. So I could
Uh-huh.
move all these things. Then I went on and learned, sort of party trick boy. It's actually a very useful structuring and support of the
Yeah.
breathing system. And I'm just wondering, just going back to that very basic start, as you work with people, that their ability to actually support a system of breathing, how parlous a state are many people in just with their muscular structure and their physical capacities to breathe? How long does it take to get someone to a place where they can start? Is really what
Mm.
I guess my question is.
It really varies. I have to say, I don't think there's one thing that I could say because it depends on what kind of conditioning, and I mean conditioning both psychologically as well as physically that person has had. Deepak Chopra talks about it. The ancient Tamil Yoga Siddhas talked about it. Our psyche is embedded, our breathing has become reflective of our psychological patterns.
Mm.
So it just depends on how much conditioning there is. Is there trauma as well? Is there emotional dysregulation that's chronic or is it only episodic? What kind of physical conditioning does the person have? And what kind of appetite do they have for exploring consciousness, shall we say, for exploring the great mystery of life, like who am I really and what is this really about? Because I have seen cases where in one breathwork session, somebody will have what we call a breath release,
Mm.
where, for instance, an example that I could give you is one of my students had grown up feeling very isolated in her home. She had a very lovely, beautiful mother who was not treated very well by her husband, who was some philandering, and her three sons, who picked up the behavior from their father of how they should treat their mother with dismissively. And so, therefore, they treated their sister dismissively, and she just felt very isolated. And she had an asthma attack at the age of about 17 or 18. And she remembers it was so life threatening that she had to be put in intensive care unit. And she remembers feeling so isolated. She just was crying and screaming because she was in a tent for people to please touch her. And they wouldn't, because that was the medical thing of that time. And so when she came to do breath work the first time, that memory came up while she was breathing, of the difficulty in breathing, the not being touched, the isolation from her childhood. It was a whole pattern, a whole conditioning that had layer upon it. And somehow she just had the faith or the courage to keep on breathing. And against all odds, even when it felt like she was reliving the asthmatic spasms, her lungs just opened up and she felt like she was breathing fully for pretty much the first time in her adult life. And so I have seen that kind of thing happen where there's like a breakthrough kind of experience, the way there might be. Some people talk about that with psychedelics, but I see it all the time with breath work. And some people may feel that they really just want to feel their own agency of one step at a time, moving through the breath, unpeeling a layer, get this rib cage open a little bit more, feel a little bit more comfortable about lying down and doing the breath work, and that's okay too. So it's really very different. But I think you said something very salient, Richard, when you started this question about why are we so far away from it at this point? And I think that part of why we're so far away from it is that the outer manifestations of human intelligence have moved faster than our inner wisdom sort of as a species has developed. So we have the internet, but I think the internet is what needs to get as powerful or even more so than the internet. And with that whole digitalization, I know I'm not your first guest or last that will talk about this. We are so over adrenalized, so cortisol driven by this constant information coming at us, some of which, of course, is very distressing information coming at us much faster than it used to. And I think that in the context of that, we're not able to stay regulated. Our breathing becomes dysregulated. We don't breathe deeply because we're sort of avoiding feeling certain things. We have fear when we breathe deeply sometimes because it feels like we're going to cry. People will often say that, like, I feel like I'm going to cry. And as a breath worker, I get to say, that would be beautiful. I'll sit here with you while you cry. And so, yeah, our breathing has become very, very challenged and stressed. And I think this is the time. There's a lot of conversation going on about breathing. I think that in 2020, we had, of course, it's an ancient practice, but in 2020, I think we sort of reached what Gurdjieff might call a shock point in the development of humanity. First of all, James Nestor wrote a beautiful book called Breath, which became a New York Times bestseller. But he did it right at the time. Look at the synchronicity of this, that three major things happened in 2020. COVID. So everybody became aware suddenly of how precious breathing is and what a problem it is if you can't breathe and how you can die. Secondly, we had in the United States the George Floyd incident of the I can't breathe. And that just really gets to the gut of anybody can understand that. And of course, he was just speaking for the countless people throughout history that have had, been marginalized, had their breath snuffed out of them in some way because of their creed or their belief or their race or whatever it may be. So that was really like a shot heard around the world about breathing. And third was the big forest fires. Like, you're in Australia and you had one of the worst, where they estimate that at least 1 billion animals suffocated and died and burned, and all of that forest area. And that same thing happened in Europe and then in the Western United States. So I think those three things happening in the same year, 2020, James's book coming out, it just, it was an exponential interest in breathing after that. And now you just hear people all the time asking about breath work. But as you said, it's really something that's so natural. Like when a baby is born, if the birth hasn't been too challenging, there's a kind of natural breathing that's very full, very relaxed, very regulated. But we have had these very challenging birth practices that interrupt that breathing pattern. And now we have a humanity that's deeply, deeply distressed and adrenalized. So this is Breathwork's time to really say to the human species, look, this is your greatest medicine. It belongs to all of you. It belongs to the people. It's democratic. Once you learn how to do it, yes, it's great to have a coach, a facilitator, a therapist, a breath worker that can help take you very deep. But on a day-to-day basis, you have the greatest medicine and nutrient right in your own chest.
Yeah, it's so beautifully described this. But it's a medicine in itself,
Yeah.
certainly. But it's a natural nutrition.
Yeah.
It's a part of. I mean, certainly we eat food. We call it nutrition because we need the amino acids. And I give some lovely lectures on how you have to eat half your proteins, and fascinating things. But the breath brings in valuable nutrients, oxygen, things. It also breathes out things. So there's, I was just thinking there, you could almost describe it that we have a malnutrition
Yes.
of breathing, and but that crying too. I was also thinking one of the things that I don't love to see, but when I do see it, I engage with it productively. Is the sobbing of
Mhm.
letting go, not the sobbing of re-traumatizing, but the sobbing of letting go. And so
Mhm.
often what happens is this sob, and as it settles or as the body releases that tension and energy, almost always there's a huge
Mhm.
as they complete the sobbing
Mhm.
and give themselves, it's like re-nutritionalizing themselves. We're
Yeah.
making it up. And Stephen Porges talked about this a lot with the
Yes.
polyvagal, a dysautonomia. Our autonomic nervous system is disrupted by these traumas, and breath work goes right back to the fundamental uh, state of calm and relax. I don't think there's anything which moves you from a state of distress to or away from a state of distress more effectively or more readily than some kind of breathing activity. And so in the book, let's get into there, some of those things. And I know you're nodding, just sort of, so then opening it up. What are some of the ways we can use it therapeutically in times of
Yeah.
difficulty?
Yeah.
Which is just another side of what you're saying, how we can use it healingly. But in this media, what are some of the frameworks there or the utilizations that we can do?
Yes, a very wonderful question. And first of all, Richard, I want to say what a wonderful observation that you've noticed about the sobbing and the letting go, and that that's different than re-traumatization. And one of the things that a skilled breath worker, a very well-trained therapist breath worker, as I call them in the book, will know how to do is to ensure that that release of that sobbing is a release and not a re-traumatization. And part of how that can happen is because trauma is something from the past. Usually the breath has been held during trauma, or it's been like heightened, like you're hyperventilating. So when you can have a body memory, or you can work with the emotions that went along with a trauma, and you continue breathing deeply and beautifully and with support, you're automatically getting an experience of, oh, that's something that happened in the past. I'm here now. I'm well now. And my inner adult, as we might say, can take care of the one, whether it's a child part of me or an adult part of me that went through this trauma. And I can now breathe fully in the presence of this pain or fear or whatever it is. It's incredibly empowering. So that's one of the things about breathwork is that somatic, empowering, embodied experience of now, me, wholeness, regardless of my story or anything else that I've been through. Because you've looked at the book, and I'm very touched that you have, that I have presented a model where there are basically 5 different groups of kinds of breathwork practice, because breathwork is a spectrum of practices that address anything from simple cortisol regulation and, restoration and relaxation to this deep human potential, like who are we really? What are our deepest gifts? How can we cultivate them and contribute them to life? And so in these 5 groups, there's the first group is this restoration, regulation, very simple breathing practices. Most of them involve breathing deeply in the inhale and then letting go on the exhale, whether you let go with a sigh that's audible or you shake or whatever, there are a million practices like that. You can make them up where you fly your arms up or you shake or you just let go, and they're very, very effective. The second grouping is mindfulness kinds of practices or awareness practices where you're paying attention to your breathing. And so you're learning about what is happening in you physically and psychologically. You're getting more understanding of interoceptive awareness as well as exteroceptive awareness. And those are very, very useful for waking ourselves up and learning to be present with our conditions. It's like I'm hot, I'm cold, I'm happy, I'm sad, but I'm learning how to stay present and aware of that rather than get dissociative or reactive or something like that. The third grouping has to do with very specific techniques that address specific conditions, like one that addresses asthma, or one that addresses being cold and heating oneself up, or one that addresses emotional dysregulation and how you can create a field of regulation in yourself. I mean, sleep, energy, focus, all of these kinds of things that there are different reduction of anxiety, elevation of mood. There's evidence-based science that we know now about some of these things of like what's the most effective breathing technique that they've studied so far for reducing anxiety and elevating mood. Then the fourth group has to do with developing the deeper kinds of beneficial human characteristics that we'd all like to develop, like compassion, presence, empowerment, joy. And so you have these techniques that often have visualizations that go with them, poetic orientations or invitations, but the breathing itself also mirrors. Like if, for instance, you're trying to develop empowerment, there's this breathing technique John Kabat-Zinn likes to teach of mountain breathing, And so there are these different things that you can do. The inhale and the exhale can be stronger and softer, longer, shorter, that kind of thing. And then the last is these human potential, is what I call them, group 5 techniques that some people might know those along the lines of names like integrative breath work, transformational breath work, therapeutic breath work, holotropic breath work, used to be called rebirthing, conscious connected breathing. All of them have a similar dynamic where we're breathing deeply in a way that we keep breathing even when the tears start to come, even if there's anxiety that arises, even if imagery arises from the past or the present, even if transcendental experiences start to arise, feelings of deep connection, you learn to breathe with all of it so that you are able to integrate these multidimensional aspects of self into a whole psyche that can be present. And, it just opens up so much meaning in your life and so much capacity. So when you ask the question, what can people do to start to integrate this therapeutically? I mean, there's the whole spectrum that I just said. I mean, just any therapist can learn about their own breathing enough that they will understand that the mirror neurons that we now know about are being activated in the treatment room, but with the breathing that the therapist is doing, the client is probably picking up on it in some way, and vice versa. So for a therapist to become aware of the power of their own breathing and to be able to breathe fully when their client is, for instance, sharing about trauma, sharing about a conundrum, sharing about anxiety, for the therapist to be able to breathe fully, to notice their own dysregulation, to call themselves, as you so intelligently said, it's the fastest way we know to get a state change. You can get a state change with one breath, right? But the breath work, the practice of that begins to bring trait changes that then, stay with you. So the therapist just learning about their own breathing and practicing breath work is already going to have an impact in a therapeutic setting. But then if you also learn that you, for instance, you could have your clients breathe a few deep breaths at the beginning of a session. You could pause in the middle of sessions when there's some kind of dysregulation going on. When someone cries or laughs and it opens up something, you can pause and have them breathe so it becomes a more embodied experience. Again, we're trying to move from state change to trait change. You can invite the client to be able to say, I feel like I need to pause and breathe deeper so I can understand a little bit more of what's happening. But then there's also, the development of learning certain techniques. For instance, the one that helps reduce anxiety, which I can talk about in a moment, or the one that brings emotional regulation. And those can be brought into therapeutic understanding. Or let's say that the client says, I'm having a great deal of difficulty focusing. Well, then I have in the book something called enhanced focus breathing. And it's a kind of breathwork practice that helps develop the skill of really staying present with one thing at a time. So there are different techniques that consumers, if you will, or breathers, I like to call them, can use themselves, or they can get coaching from a therapist breath worker. And then there's that very deep kind of breath work that I was talking about, where you can access expanded states of consciousness, the plane of possibility, emotional memory, muscle memory. You open up a plane in a sense of unconditional positive regard that Carl Rogers talked about in an embodied way, where you're learning that you can breathe in the presence of anything that you may feel, fear, anxiety, rage, grief, but also love and joy and ecstasy and pleasure. And this affords a more rapid acceleration of being able to address intrapsychic material, things from our past, attachment, stuff that we need to look at, and then also brings on board for many people those transpersonal aspects, of what am I here for? What's the meaning of all of this? What's my purpose?
Yeah, no, it's lovely. Uh, the broader side, and there are just a few thoughts running through my head, but my immediate sort of thought is that wonderful thing. We there are things, or there are people, there are experiences. We breathe because of it, as different from the wonderful aspect of breathing through it, breathing on it, breathing to it, is what I hear as going on.
Mhm.
And I mean, there was an interesting thing as an actor. Uh, what we did, I don't know whether we can hear the little siren we have next door, but anyway, they'll work it out. That we used to, and some authors actually write the pauses in. Ibsen used to write this and would write in a pause and a place to
Yes.
breathe. And what our acting teacher was talking to us, was that we breathe in the pattern of our thinking. So
Mhm.
that as I have a thought, I express that thought. And then when I have a pause or a rethink or a new thought, I'll just stop and give a little breath, or give myself a little pause in the breath, and then I'll move on. So actually what we would do is we would look to this breathing pattern to understand the difference between me and the character
Mhm.
I was presenting, or the version. I mean, characters
Exactly.
they're all versions of me. And here was the really interesting thing about acting, and I think its best gift to me was that at the end of a performance, the end of a show, the end of a whatever it was, who do you go back to? Um, who was the and breathing is and I'm just imagining now carrying this into what you're saying with the therapeutic frames. The um, is breath work a way in which we can, well, you've already said it, but if you speak a bit more to it, bring yourself back into yourself. So from the anxiety, from the stuff, perhaps that little anxiety or that anxious or that upregulated state where you're just a bit, you know, what was that one you were referring to, that little exercise or
Yeah.
activity that we could share with people?
Okay, yeah, I'll do that. And let me just say first, because I think you really brought up something fascinating, Richard, about the actor being able to access states that want to be expressed creatively for hopefully, the elevation of humanity, like there's some kind of inspiration. And yet, who is the one that is doing the acting? And somehow the actor needs to be able to both remember themselves and also be able to express something that might be differentiated from that. And I think breathing is a way to do that. And Dick Schwartz, the founder of internal family systems, we've talked about the fact that the self, as he puts it, the greater self, um, the breathing supports that self in being present and just being here and being able to relate to these different parts, right? The firefighters and those that are exiled and all of that. And Stephen Porges has talked to me about this too, that there is exactly what you were saying, that there's a way, that there's a natural cadence and a rhythm to our thoughts, and it should include breathing. But we've been speeding up, so we try to talk faster than that natural cadence. He talks about the ways that you can stimulate polyvagal. There's the singing and the chanting, there's the social emotional regulation with someone else. There's also breathing. And he has told me several times, and he's also told Shirley Tellis, who's the foremost yoga and breath researcher in the world, that breathing is actually the most powerful of all of them. So it's really, as you said, it's this incredible nutrient in medicine. And I dream of a world in which we so value the first breath, and we understand that that's laying the foundation for everything else that we're ever going to experience. And that with whatever we experience, if we have gotten a good experience of breathing, and our breathing is supported, our breathing is watched, or we're taught even as we grow older how to utilize our breath, we will always have this medicine to return or access the plane of possibility, which gives us a greater amount of resources for dealing with whatever would arise in life. So now
Yeah,
with the
I want to see the exercise, but I just had a quick thought to add in. I
okay.
jumped in. My young granddaughter, 7, we were just at the play park, and she jumped from one side across a gap, and didn't see a low hanging beam, hit herself in the head, and it hurt. And there was no saying, be brave. It hurt. But I can remember, and I actually had a degree of consciousness about my activity, whereas I grabbed her, and of course she was sobbing, and I was just there going, "Yes, that's right.
Exactly.
That was so awful, darling." But now, and so consciously, I was giving that breathing pattern, and so hers eventually just settled into mine. And then we were coherent together,
Mhm.
and we were able to settle her down. So she was able to experience her discomfort. I wasn't talking her out. I wasn't saying, hold it in, suck it in, or was I saying, let it out, that's awful. But we were using the discord and the coordination to find that that element. Now, I have a feeling that's what you're about to tell us with your
Absolutely. I mean,
exercise. But
brilliant what you did. Brilliant. Um, because there's a natural, our bodies want to heal. When we get cut, they mobilize to heal the body. Same thing with the psyche. And I think that when someone does not have to suppress their authentic self, and this is one of the beautiful things about these group 5 human potential breathwork sessions, by the way, is that in a way, what you're saying to the person is you do not have to suppress anything. This is your time to experience your authenticity biologically, physiologically, emotionally, intellectually, cognitively, and spiritually. And you just let people do that. And it's so healing because the natural impulse of the being is to go towards wholeness, is to go towards goodness. And so when you held your granddaughter in that way, and you mirrored for her what could be possible in your own body, her inner healer was able to find the way to come through that without holding on to trauma, probably, and without about it. It's like she knows now that she can deal with these things. And that was really, really beautiful. So thank you for doing that. Yeah, this technique was a study that came out of Stanford, Spiegel, Huberman et al. They were studying 3 different types of breathing to see which would be the most effective for reducing anxiety. And the 3 types they were studying was box breathing, which is where you breathe in for a certain number of counts, then hold the breath for that same amount of counts, like 4 and 4, then breathe out 4 and then hold for 4. Or cyclical hyperventilation, which is very effective for helping emotional release. But that's where you breathe more rapidly for a few breaths, maybe 5 to 20, and then you sort of hold the breath, for a moment and then let go. Wim Hof does that kind of breathing, but we also do that a lot in the group 5 kinds of breathing. So they were studying that, and then they did this one that goes like this: you inhale deeply, and then right when you think that you would breathe out, you take in another little sip. You breathe another little bit of breath in, and then you sigh it out through the mouth. So you breathe in through the nose in 2 segments, and what they found was, of the 3 breaths, this one, doing it for 5 minutes, reduced anxiety level, elevated mood, better than the other 2 did. Moreover, in the thing of moving from state to trait, if you did that for 5 minutes a day for 30 days, you had trait changes where you really had an ongoing sense of reduced anxiety and elevated mood. Yeah.
And it's just bizarre. I did that in acting school. We we did all those things to engage ourselves. So I'm kind of look back. I should go back and find my breathwork teacher and say thank you. I don't know whether you knew what you were doing, but it was
Well, see,
very,
I
very
think we
valuable.
know some of these things naturally, there's a wisdom of the body. And by the way, not to get too esoteric, but this is one of the beautiful things about breath work, is that um, it is an invitation to a kind of unification within the self, where you are able to be present with your fear, your anger, your rage, your joy, your pleasure, your compassion, and all of that. So you can be an authentic person, and you're not tense, you're not holding on to chronic patterns of defense or promotion or image making. But also that it's really inviting us to feel our essential unity with everything else. And it happens all the time. People who wouldn't even like each other ordinarily or think they're enemies, but they breathe together and something else begins to open up, because really they're tapping into that plane of possibility. And so again, I dream of a breathing centered culture where we actually understand that breathing is a language, it's an intelligence, it's a wisdom, and we have ways that it's part of our culture that breathing is just natural. I say a breath worker in every emergency room, a breath worker in every school, a breath worker in every theater, there should be around so that people can be supported in this powerful medicine and nutrient.
Yeah. Yeah. There was a lovely thing that emerged, I was speaking, I did this possibility workshop, where I'm bringing my ideas, and I wrote a bunch of thoughts down, which I just put on bits of large pieces of paper, which I stuck on the walls. And some of them we referred to, but this one really took a height. And I've been talking a lot lately to people about truth, about they say, oh, these terrible things, terrible things are happening to me, or the trauma, when we're talking about the trauma, that the actual event is simply a truth. Like, I did get hit, or I did get attacked. And it's a truth because it ceases to have any energy.
Mm-hmm.
It simply has presence.
Mm-hmm.
And this is something you've been talking to, but the corollary of that is then it's the opinion we have of that truth that causes all the fuss. And I hear that, just sharing that with you because I've only said it like for a few weeks, but that sense of coherence that occurs when we are simply embodied. Um,
Mm-hmm.
and the vast majority of our, biology is really all just about movement and breathing.
Mm-hmm.
There's only a few bits that are maybe 70% of our body is about, movement and breathing. And this coherence that you can achieve, even with people who, on the opinion side of things, you may or
Right.
may not have a coherence with, that you can on a human level. And this authentic thing we talk about, you could probably co-use the word, interchangeably use the word truth. It's just a true element. It's an aspect of self that, or an expression of ourself that isn't good, bad, right, wrong, and it just is. So it has
Right.
this ethereal quality, and that moves to your consciousness frame of moving through that inspirational that link between inspiration and consciousness, sort of wandering then on into also then the unknown, the non-conscious. But that little bit there, I'm not sure if I've
Right.
triggered some thoughts for you to share with us.
We all have a kind of to varying degrees. Everybody has a different degree of it, but when we're not connected, when we're not living our most authentic self, we replace that with a search for identity and a search for meaning, and we sort of want to identify that I'm this kind of person, I'm not that kind of person, and that can be everything from, of course, gender and skin color and all of that, or just, ways of being. But it's at a deeper level. It's like, well, I'm the kind of person who would never be late, or I would never do this, or I'd never do that, and we're like constantly trying to fixate on these identities, and they're not our actual natural flow of life force. And when our life force is able to flow naturally and it's not being squeezed and managed and controlled and hidden if we think something's unacceptable, but we're actually able to be ourselves and be with the different aspects of ourselves and let our energy flow, we're just happier and we're healthier. And we are also connected to a larger stream of consciousness. We're connected to creation and life flow and the sort of one breath that the whole planet is, that oxygen moving through the air and the waters and the land and all creatures and the trees and mycelium and mushrooms. And so when you were talking about that, I was like, yes, because we have a desperate, important need to keep feeling into the unconditioned part of our. So we keep thinking, oh, that's who I am. And then we're sort of constricted by that instead of being in a kind of free flow of evolving growth of who we are. And so that's what really comes to me when you talk about all of that, is that if we had breathing, the importance of it as a language, as a way of being, as a way of being with one another, as a way of listening, and even how you were talking about the pausing, the natural pauses with our thoughts and our emotions and all that, I think we would live in a more unified, peaceful, expressive, kind, and loving world, because people would be feeling filled with their life force and their authenticity. And they wouldn't be feeling the need to present an identity or to believe the identity that they have tricked themselves into believing that they are, which is more limited than what most of us are. I experience all the time in our consciousness school here, and we work with people as young. I mean, I work with children too, but even in our classes, 16 to 96, my dad was 99 before he left this planet, and he was still doing some of this work too. And I witness all the time when people are able to act, it moves underneath the stories they've had about themselves, the conditions, the identities, and they're feeling something very nurturing, very nourishing, very medicinal, really. That is, I would say, the creative life force itself. Yeah.
And I mean, I was actually the introduction that I had with Ernest Rossi years ago was a book, and I talked about this what I call the Whittle-Loser world
Yeah.
mentality, which is just the Steve Porges has been talking about it, a lot of others, Dan's talked about it, and Siegel, but the externalized evaluation
Yeah.
place, and so there's not only those things we try to find, but also the things we try to measure up to. And it's very, very difficult. I remember with a men's group, uh, and we were working with the uh, the idea of
You
now,
do, because Dan would even talk about this, like, who's the you that we're talking about? It's almost like we're creating separation whenever we do that. Like, how are you and who are you and what do you do? What if
yeah.
we said to each other something like, how's your breathing today? It's like it opens up a different level where we're asking each other about our experience of ourselves and life and each other, which is a kind of verb like experience rather than an identity and who are you. And so I think that there's a next evolution of humanity and the language of breathing that could eventually evolve.
See, that's so neat. I mean, it's, how's your breathing today? Oh, it's been
Yeah.
unsettled. Uh,
Yeah.
And so therefore there is within me some unsettling that I will work at, or flowing beautifully. Yeah, it's
Yeah.
I mean, and I think back to some of the things again as an actor going through when you look at some of these characters, and particularly getting more into the indigenous characters that I was fortunate enough to have experienced some engagement with, but also some of the more simple characters who were maybe the fishermen,
Mm.
and there was one I can remember just sort of sitting there sewing the nets, and the fisherman was uh, English sort of thing back in historic, but hi, how are you? And you could just hear without the language, yes, and they're sewing away, and everything's rhythmic and everything's patterned, and it didn't matter whether it was the return to a sense of balance and calm, regardless of the good fortune or bad fortune. And there was that sense of these fishermen, yes, but I'm back here on land repairing my nets. I am alive. I am well. I am safe. These sorts of fundamental elements do get distorted by a culture that says you're not well until you have, or
Yes.
until you are. And this framework I just want to jump to something which is a bit of a jump because I don't want to miss out it. But there were what we call the silent peace walks.
Mm,
And this is also so silence, and I deal a lot in silence with the type of therapeutic frame that I use. And I said, it is not empty. Silence is not empty, and silence is full of breathing.
hmm.
Is something that I'm just sort of really getting a sensitivity to as we talk. Can you speak a little bit about these walks of
Yeah.
silence and containment?
Yeah.
What's going on
Yeah.
there? I'd love to hear more.
So the origin of the silent peace walks was a few decades ago. A very beautiful man, Stephen, I think his last name was Folder. He wanted to create an experience where Israelis and Palestinians that had experienced themselves had experienced trauma from the different wars that had happened. This is a very poignant thing to talk about at this time in our history when we have this whole thing going on with Israel and Gaza. So I just want to acknowledge that it might be bringing up a lot of feelings for people right now. But this is some 20 some years ago.
Yeah, so let's just speak more broadly about
Yeah,
the human experience rather than the political
exactly.
one. Yeah.
And he had the experience that if people walked together in silence without it being for a particular cause, or like this is I'm pro this or anti this, but just they walked together in silence, that something began to open up between them, a kind of open-heartedness and open-mindedness that couldn't otherwise happen. So he was a friend of Jack Kornfield's, and Jack Kornfield was very taken by this idea. And Jack wanted to do a walk in New York City along these lines, and he contacted me and some other people to ask if we would create a group of leaders, shall we say, that would promote the walk and invite people and also help lead the walk. And it was a profound experience. It was a very, very cold, rainy, late fall day. I mean, really, nobody should have showed up, but hundreds of people showed up. And we literally walked in silence around Central Park, and we didn't even have a permit. We went all the way up the north side. We didn't know, were these people Democrats, Republicans, libertarians? Did they believe in this? Did they believe in that? None of that is what a silent peace walk is about. It's about experiencing what it is to be peace with anybody on the planet. And so we walked in silence. It was a fairly long walk. We weren't supposed to be allowed to go into the park. The police were so moved by what was happening. They let us come into the park. We formed circles. It was really extraordinary. And so out of that, I then did some silent peace walks in New York, smaller ones, and then some in Baltimore, Maryland as well. And we are in the process of developing. We actually have it like a kid in a box, with the idea being that, like, you would just have these few little guidelines that you would follow in terms of doing a silent peace walk. And you could have 10 people at your house for dinner and decide to just do a silent peace walk in your neighborhood. So we'd like to see it go viral. And it's one of my next projects. Now that the book is birthed, I'm gonna put some more energy into that silent peace walk thing. It's an amazing experience to walk through a neighborhood, to walk through a part of a city or a town, but just you don't have to know any information about anybody else. You start to know people from a deeper level, and something starts to open that is a thing of empathy, compassion, wanting to support the other person. And so you learn what it is to actually be peace.
Yeah, I mean, language is a wonderful thing to share the richness of what is going on in our heads, but it's also a very annoying mechanism to share our agitations and our opinions. So the absence of it, Ernie Rossi and I would do this. He was a quiet sort of man, but we would just fabulously enjoy these wonderful walks along the coastline, and where we
Mhm.
would say nothing, and then something might emerge, and we'd have
Yeah.
this sort of excited conversation about some idea, and then we would just slide back into it's not silence; it was just not speaking. So, because we were breathing, we were walking, and we were active, and we were present together, and I think that sort of experience um, uh, is something that we have left behind in our ever-present, active, constantly battered. And we know there's Buddhist programs and techniques of silent retreats and so on and so forth, and these things have a long history. So we've not been doing this well to some degree for a long time.
Yeah.
Uh,
And what you're saying is so important, Richard, and just how easy it would be to integrate this understanding into therapeutic practice of any kind,
yeah.
psychotherapy, for instance. It's just so easy, and it's going to exponentially increase the impact of the therapeutic process, because everything that the person is experiencing, they will have an embodied experience of it rather than just a cognitive experience of it. Yeah.
Well, look, we really we've just could go on forever, Ben. We've talked quite a bit of time. I hope everyone's still with us because it's been so interesting and fascinating. And we do need to conclude. But is there something that we haven't said, or is there just a little final sort of sum up of some of the feelings, or something that we can leave everyone with to breathe about after
Mhm.
we
Yeah.
finish?
Yeah. Thank you so much for that question, Richard. I mean, there's so many places that I could go with that. If I just kind of gather a few of them together, I would say um, one of the important things about doing breath work and conscious breathing is to not measure yourself, that you should be breathing a certain way, or, oh, I can't breathe, or because I can't breathe this certain way, it's not going to work for me. I really want the listeners to know that just beginning to pay attention to your breathing, and just the simple shift of even not so much taking a deep breath, because then you're kind of taking a deep breath from your old patterns, but being aware that you're being breathed. You're not even having to effort it, like you're being breathed, and that you can receive that, and you can then allow it to deepen without forcing anything. And you can come to know your own breath and just notice, wow, I breathe in smoothly, and then about three-quarters of the way in, there's a little catch, and wonder what that's about. Like, please, when you go to do breath work, this is the last place where you want to bring in the inner critic or the judger, because your whole being, your life force, the intelligence and wisdom and the potential of your being is encoded in your breath. And if you give it space, the way a breath worker will give you space and support you and just say whatever comes up, if you give yourself space, you will begin to unravel some of the deeper mysteries of yourself. So that's one thing that I want to say. Secondly, I want to say that I think that um, everybody deserves to take 7 minutes a day and just focus on their breathing. I find that 5 minutes gets a state change, and 10 minutes is sometimes feels a little too long for people. But that 7 minute sweet spot begins to get a trait change. And just after a week of doing that, you'll notice a big difference in your life. And then really think about treating yourself to if maybe your therapist knows about breath work, or you can find a really well-trained breath worker. I'm the co-director of the Global Professional Breathwork Alliance, and we set the global standards for training and ethics. And so you can go to our website, breathworkalliance.com, and find people that have that level of training. Or you can contact me at Inspiration Consciousness School, and I'll help find you somebody either virtually or in person. But there's something really powerful about the mirror neurons between a breath worker and a client, and that permission to breathe and be authentic and be yourself and to contact the plane of possibility. That's just magnificent. And I would hope that everybody would avail themselves of that opportunity at some point.
Oh, that's lovely, and there's some connections, and we'll have all those things written all over the screen for those looking at it, and we'll have that in the notes. And then there's the book Breathwork and Psychotherapy for those therapists who are looking for how to expand their understanding into this. And your
Richard, may I
website.
say that the book, even though it's called Breathwork and Psychotherapy, it's actually written for clinicians, breath workers, and it's written for everybody. It's written for all breathers on the planet, because there's probably over 40 breathing practices in here. I haven't even counted them all. It may be more than that. There's a whole chapter on optimal breathing. There's a chapter on writing a breathing biography. There's inspirational stuff in there. Some of Dan Siegel's stuff is in there. So it's really written for everybody, even though it's going to give clinicians and breath workers a deep understanding of how they can work with clients. But it'll help clients figure out how to not only breathe well, but also find people that can support them that really know what they're doing.
Yeah, it's a really good point to bring up, because that's very true. I mean, the title of the book is something that people make up. But in turn, in there, and really one of the things that I'm realizing more is the nature of the fact that that all interpersonal activity has a therapeutic meaning, a kindness, meaning a movement towards betterment framework. So read the book and take from it that those things that are at your appreciation and your value. And I reckon that everybody will find many things in this book that are particularly resonant for them. So we recommend all those things. And for now, we leave it at that lovely promotional moment, but appropriately promotional, because it's a wonderful thing. And I look forward to seeing the things that happen with your work in the future, and some peace walks. If I find one around wherever I am in the world, I'll join in. Be wonderful.
Mm. Well, we'll
But
be launching that website sometime this year too. So then the link for that will be on our Inspiration Consciousness School website. Yeah.
Fabulous. So for now, Jessica, we have to say goodbye. Thank you so much for your time.
Thank you so much for your time and your devotion to the world.